The FTC is trying to put Microsoft's acquisition on ice. Well, it happened as somewhat expected, although a little bit unprecedented. The FTC has gone back to the appeals courts and is trying to put Microsoft's acquisition of Activision on ice. Now, unlike other things in the jurisdiction world and the courts, things are moving very quickly because there are some hard deadlines. Those hard deadlines being, well, first off, next week Microsoft is supposed to close the deal, which potentially may even happen over the weekend. The temporary injunction that's stopping them from Microsoft closing it today expires Friday at midnight, and so the FTC has filed a petition or filed the documentation, which you can see here, with the Ninth Circuit of Appeals, the Ninth Circuit here. And they say, notice is hereby given that the plaintiff, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, appeals to the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit from the court's opinion dated July 12th. And that is the decision where the judge said, hey, look, the FTC did not do a proper job here. We don't believe that their evidence is accurate or justified. And so Microsoft, you can go buy Activision. Of course, Microsoft starts running downhill as fast as humanly possible, and the FTC is now racing against that Friday deadline. So it's now filed. So this is a thing. This is a thing that we have to deal with. If you're sick and tired of these videos and all the content coming out, the good news is in the next 4 to 5 days, it should hopefully, fingers crossed, all be wrapped up one way or another. That being said, there's still a lot of unknowns. So what's going to happen here is, first off, you need to understand the differences here. And I'm not a legal expert. I've tried to do the best research that I can, not having a JD, not being a lawyer. But typically and historically, trial courts are about arguing the facts. So these are the facts that the FTC presented, the court battles and everything that we've seen so far. Appellate courts are about arguing the law. So at this point, the FTC is trying to make the argument to the appeals court that the judge interpreted the law incorrectly for establishing the legal precedents for ruling if this acquisition should be allowed. And what this hinges on, and I'm not saying that they have a good argument, I'm not saying it's going to go through, but this is effectively my understanding of what their argument is going to hinge on, based on legal experts who have commented in on this, is that the judge had to prove, like the FTC needed to prove that the deal may harm competition, not that it will. So in the initial court ruling and everything else, the FTC, the judge interpreted based on the review of the legal documentation published after justifying the position, is not that the acquisition will hurt competition, like immediately. It's that it may. So will versus may is what they're going to be arguing potentially in the appeals court, whether or not this potentially may impact competition. And so this is more fine-grained legalese rather than arguing the basis of the facts. So keep in mind, they're going to try to argue what's happening with the law and how it's stated, not with the evidence that was presented. So it's an important distinction about how this is going forward. So today, we will hear, sometime today, we will hear the rationale from the FTC going back and filing all of this. And so we don't know exactly when that's going to happen, but it's going to happen at least starting today, because remember, they have hard deadlines that based on the previous injunctions about when all this stuff lifts. And you got to believe that as soon as it lifts, Microsoft is going to cut that novelty size check and walk it down to the Activision offices and get this thing done, because they want it over with. Everybody wants it over with, and people just want to move on one way or another. So it's moving very quickly. Now, other things that are also related to this, and again, why things have to happen so quickly, is that the NASDAQ announced today that prior to the trading session opening on Monday, July 17th, Activision will be removed. So as you can see, there's like real precedence here for why this has to move so quickly, because you don't want to delist the stock if the transaction hasn't moved through. But to me, this would come as Microsoft and Activision are signaling to NASDAQ, like, look, we're going to try to close this thing this weekend, and we believe we will be able to. So please be prepared to delist the stock. And that is the NASDAQ officially saying, like, hey, this is really like happening. And so again, this really puts an emphasis on why things have to move so quickly. Now, of course, Microsoft, Brad Smith, not me, put out a ruling that says the district court's ruling made crystal clear that this acquisition is good for both competition and consumers. We're disappointed that the FTC is continuing to pursue what has become demonstrably weak case and will oppose further efforts to delay the ability to move forward. That comes from Brad Smith, the vice chair and president. He leads up all the legal efforts for Microsoft. Now, there's some more documentation that's come out. It's not necessarily always new, but this is going to be, again, part of the argument that I think Microsoft will make again in the appeals court. It says the only apparent victims of foreclosure, which basically means shutting down, that the FTC has been able to name in the case are Sony on console, Google on cloud, and Amazon for the first time in the closing arguments. It's hard to understand why the FTC has filed a lawsuit to protect other large technology companies who have taken different strategy approaches to gaming, especially Sony, who has an exclusive content library that dwarfs Microsoft by 8-1 and seems to be focused on preserving the $70 per game business model. This is just some more documentation that I think is going to be surfacing here, is that, again, the FTC did a not great job of arguing that it's going to harm the competition for the market. It's going to harm individual businesses, which is not the FTC's position. It should be, in theory, to protect the market competition, not to protect a Sony, a Google, or an Amazon, especially like Google and Amazon, who are both massive companies. It seems, and that's Microsoft's point here, is like, why is Microsoft doing, or why is the FTC trying to protect these companies? It seems a little unreasonable that fair competition would allow for this against those competitors. Also, other things that are likely going to show up here. Call of Duty, which was a pivotal thing. And again, I actually think that this was a fundamental flaw of the FTC's argument, was focusing on specifically on Call of Duty and not the entire catalog. But either way, Call of Duty is the brand name that a lot of people recognize. And Microsoft, once again, showing that if the merger goes through, which again, we're back in that if stage, although it feels like it's more probable, but again, until the check clears, we're in this with merger. You can see how much more access Call of Duty will have on other platforms. So, yikes, here we are with this again. Now, the kind of worst case for scenario for Microsoft here is that they go to the appeals court, and then the appeals court is like, yep, the judge actually didn't follow the correct ruling. And then what happens? Well, I don't quite exactly know. One, that would throw a significant wrench into Microsoft's ability to close the deal. I don't know if the appeals court would actually try to overturn this decision that quickly. It's possible at this point. Anything is truly possible. I would suspect that there might be delays, and that would be, again, on the Microsoft side, be a very significant issue, because as we've noted time and time again, July 18th is when Microsoft would potentially owe $3 billion to Activision if they have to split and part ways. But at that point, the stock had already been delisted, and so here we are. We are in overtime of the Super Bowl. If this was a football game or sort of the World Series or whatever you want to call it, we would be in the overtime segment now, and we will see. And then, like, what happens if they do appeal and then they get ruled? Then is Microsoft going to appeal it? And then it's like, okay, now we're just in a downward spiral of chaos about whether or not this thing is actually going to get closed. So there you go. We will wait and see what Microsoft has to say about what the FTC does today, and then we will continue to watch this. But the next 48 hours, we're going to learn a lot more about where this is heading and everything else. And so maybe by early next week, we should know one way or another if it's finally done. We kind of thought we were already through some of this. But yeah, just keep in mind that the trial courts are about facts and the appellate courts are more so about the interpretation. I think that is what this is going to come down to. Whether or not that makes a decision, whether or not the FTC is correct in their assumption and what the legal experts have been writing about this case is up to the courts to decide. That is going to be the defining factor and something we should be watching for in the decision that comes out. Whether or not it's justified or not, it really just comes down to is that Microsoft outside of gaming is so massive that it just continues to not feel great. The FTC has been having a hard time trying to enforce all these vertical mergers or deny and push away these vertical mergers. And this is, again, a vertical merger. Typically, horizontal mergers are the things that get shunned pretty quickly where you're trying to cannibalize a market. But this is Microsoft just trying to buy its way up the ladder. And should a company that's over $1 trillion valuation be allowed to do that? You know, I'm not going to sit here and make a case one way or another. That's for you to decide about the market in itself. The point remains is that Microsoft cleared the first hurdle. The CMA appears to be more of a minor hurdle at this point, but now they've got to get through the appeals court. And as they do, and as everything else comes out, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this channel is me.